Hello, my name is Sandra Cowan, and I'm a librarian at the University of Lethbridge in Canada. For many years, I have also maintained an art practice and a walking practice. So, the topic of my talk, walking as a research method for creativity, is very near to my heart. I have to confess that research methods is a relatively recent interest of mine. In spite of having completed two master's degrees, I didn't really understand what research methods actually meant until I was several years into my working life as a librarian. And this is the University of Lethbridge, where I work as a librarian. I realized that I needed to have an understanding of the different research methods of the disciplines that we librarians support for many reasons. It helps us understand, organize, and teach about the scholarly literature that we collect and provide access to in the library, much of which is the outcome of some kind of research method. It helps us understand and support the work of our faculty and our students. And it also gives us a wide and cross-disciplinary expert view of research and scholarship as a whole, which really no one but the library is in a position to have, as most scholars are deeply focused in their own discipline, along with perhaps a few cognate disciplines. So I began to learn a little more about the standard range of research methods: positivist and interpretive, ethnographic, quantitative methods, qualitative methods, mixed methods, data collection, and all the things that can be called data. But what if your research outcomes looks like this or like this? About 5 years ago, I became the fine arts librarian at the University of Lethbridge, and it quickly became apparent to me that the work of the faculty and the graduate students in the fine arts, for the most part, fit nowhere in these models of research methods. It also became clear that because their work, what qualifies as their research, for the purposes of graduate thesis work, promotion and tenure evaluations, and so on, was not valued nearly in the same way as the research of the sciences, social sciences, and even the humanities. As Chapman and Sawchuk, among others, point out, there is a hierarchy of research methods. At the top is positivist quantitative research, then qualitative research, especially the kind that models itself on quantitative methods. At the bottom of the knowledge hierarchy, they say, is ethnography, which muddies the waters, especially in terms of recent trends towards alternative methods of ethnographic writing, autoethnography, narrative or poetry-based ethnography, etc. And somewhere below all of that is arts-based research. As a fine arts librarian, it's obvious to me that the work of professors and graduate students in the fine arts is less respected within the academy because it does not fit easily into the evaluative rubrics used for career progression, tenure, and research grants, which privilege positivist and empirical research above all. The creation of new knowledge and insight through creative work just doesn't fit in. As Barrett puts it, there has also been little recognition, endorsement, and validation of the processes and outcomes of studio-based inquiry as scholarly activity and research alongside other disciplines in the university. She and others think that research creation or arts-based research is in crisis in terms of academic sanctioning. And why is this? Chapman and Sawchuk, I think, hit the nail on the head. They say artists find themselves in institutions where scholarly forms of publication have been dominant, and where new bureaucratic exercises, such as the imposition of metrics to measure and evaluate academic research across disciplines, threaten to introduce mechanisms that will impose new forms of standardizations. These new metrics, at least in our experience, typically model and evaluate academic outputs with measures that are rooted in the sciences, and which favor traditional academic publications that are properly indexed as a way to calculate the relative value of research. As such, much time is spent both defining and defending research creation practices as a valid form of academic inquiry. This is something I've observed at my own university. The faculty who work in arts-based or studio-based fields have to spend a lot of time and energy explaining, justifying, and fitting their work into the existing evaluative rubrics. In general, their work is not awarded the same status, and it is less likely to be awarded grant funding from academic granting agencies. This is the case even though the work of artists is generative and creative activity, a process of continuous discovery that results in new knowledge, new understandings, and real innovation. Daishand makes the case for artists' research quite clearly. Research is generally understood as a type of investigation. It is a process involving the collection of information and eventual discovery of new or revised knowledge. Using this definition, research is a search for knowledge. It involves asking questions, discovering, interpreting, and organizing data, a description that sounds a lot like art making. As Chapman and Sawchuk say, creative productions constitute knowledge in a different but culturally equivalent way to other forms of transcribed research findings, such as academic journal articles, scholarly books, mathematical formulae, research reports, studies, theses, etc. Barrett tries to justify the value of studio-based inquiry as research, including the relevance that practice-based research has for extending and articulating our capacity to discover new ways of modeling consciousness and designing alternative methods of research capable of generating economic, cultural, and social capital. The implication that creative arts research has for extending our understandings of the role of experiential, problem-based learning and multiple intelligences in the production of knowledge, the potential of studio-based research to demonstrate how knowledge is revealed and how we come to acquire knowledge, the ways in which creative arts research outcomes may be applied to develop more generative research pedagogies and methodologies beyond the discipline itself. However, Chapman and Sawchuk critique this stance of defining and trying to justify research creation or arts-based research in terms of the conventional or sanctioned methods. Arts-based research takes from many different traditions, including artistic practices and cultural and spiritual practices that evolved far outside the walls of the academy. Historically speaking, it's a fairly recent phenomenon that studio art is being taught within an academic university setting at all, and it cannot be fairly assessed by science-based measures. Furthermore, one of the characteristics of arts-based research is that it acts as a challenge to the normative frameworks and deep assumptions of the academy. The work of artists is not just aesthetic. Once I started to investigate the creative research of artists, I became fascinated by the growing movement of walking artists. Artists who use walking in their work, whether as a method, a process, or a medium of their creative work. Walking has a long history of being associated with problem-solving, thinking, and creative work. Many philosophers and writers have talked about this over the centuries. This long history is illustrated by the title of my talk, Solvitur Ambulando. It is solved by walking, a quote that is usually attributed to St. Augustine in the 5th century. Walking and creativity are both universal activities that go back to the beginning of history, so their roots and branches are many, entangled, and deeply interwoven with all human activity. We know this intuitively and experientially, but in the past number of years, there have been several research studies that demonstrate the link between walking and creativity as well. Walking as a research method is what I'm particularly interested in. Walking has started to be used as an alternative research method in architecture, human geography, anthropology, and other fields. Artists have a longer history of walking to draw on. In the Western world, going back at least to the 19th century Parisian flaneur, much discussed by Baudelaire and later Walter Benjamin. The psychogeographical walking experiments or drifts of the radical artists group, the Situationists International in the mid-20th century. The land artists, in particular Richard Long and Hamish Fulton in the 1960s, and on to the work of Canadian artist Janet Cardiff and Belgian and Mexican artist Francis Alice in the 1990s, And in this century, there's been a proliferation of walking artists and walking artist groups like the Loiterers Resistance Movement in England, the Hamilton Perambulatory Unit in Canada, and the Walking Lab, a walking research group in Toronto, Canada. Sarah Truman and Stephanie Springay of the Walking Lab group have done significant scholarly and walking work about walking as a research method, recently publishing a book called Walking Methodologies in a More Than Human World, in which they articulate walking as research and at the same time use queer theory to open up and question the method itself. They value the curiosity and the haptic, the corporeal, the sensory knowledge gained through walking. They propose walking with the human and non-human others, as well as walking with the terrain itself, as a way to unbalance power structures in research. In the past 10 years or so, there has been an increasing acknowledgement of walking as a recognized research methodology, which is used not only in the creative arts, but also social sciences and humanities. Walking can be a way to defamiliarize and interrogate the familiar, to explore the unknown, the overlooked and ignored, to use all of one's sense perceptions in embodied discovery. Because of all of this, I started to think about research methods quite differently. The processes that artists engage in to do their work are incredibly varied, but we may say in general that they are interdisciplinary, embodied, emergent, subjective, and non-teleological. It is mostly process-based, engagement with the materials, which could be almost anything, and the environment the artist is in, engagement with concept, experimentation, exploration of ideas. These are important parts of most artists' methodologies. It can't be done without the doing of it, and it's through the doing that new ideas and forms arise. So in my research, I interviewed 7 nationally known working artists from across Canada about how they do their work, what part walking plays in their work, and how they conceive of research methodologies that lead to creative production. These artists, for the most part, besides being practicing artists, also teach art in various post-secondary institutions all across Canada. The artist names are Ernie Kroger, Mary Kavanaugh, Don Gill, Donna Acri, Lisa Myers, Barbara Launder, and Marlene Creeps. They all recognize walking as an important methodology for researching and doing their artwork, whether it's photography, sculpture, installation, new media, or more conceptual kinds of work. Walking plays a part in their research, or is their main form of research, as illustrated by comments such as, "So walking itself is a methodology and a form of research," quoted from Ernie Kroger. Or as Barbara Launder said, "Walking for me is a research methodology." As I work with my analysis of the interviews that I did at the kitchen table, since due to the pandemic, my library and my university have been closed since March, there are several things that my research revealed were the important elements of walking to these artists' research and their work. It was clear that a large part of the importance of walking is a phenomenological one. It's a means to have direct subjective experience of the world. The 6 most important characteristics of walking as a research method, as identified by these artists, are the following. Walking provides direct embodied experience. So direct unmediated experience of a site. The best way to know it is through walking through it, actually being present in it. Nothing can compare to spending time moving through a specific locale in order to really experience it and understand it. Sensory connection. This is related to direct experience as well. It was brought up by the artists as a very important factor. So learning about a place through all of the senses, how a place feels. There's a deep, intimate, embodied way of knowing that cannot be replaced by any other means. The idea of collecting or foraging or gathering. All of the artists I spoke to do some kind of collecting on their walks. They could collect images with a camera. They could collect sound with an audio recorder. They collect experiences. They collect conversations and stories from other people. They collect notes, take notes, make lists. They collect video, ideas, observations of happenings. They may collect physical objects as well, such as found objects in the garbage, dust and detritus that can be used as art materials. All of these kinds of collections become some kind of material for the subsequent work that they make. The slow pace. So the pace of walking is important. Slowing down and slowing time down by moving more slowly allows for a more fully embodied experience. It allows for more observation, more thought, more conversation. There's an openness of mind and an openness of experience that occurs at the slow pace of walking that is really important to these artists. The notion of exploration is also important. So walking is an expression of curiosity. It's an open-ended, adventurous way of exploring the unknown and finding things out in an open and uncontrolled environment. The element of chance, of seeing what happens, seeing what you find, who you meet, this is all identified as really important. Thinking. So not all of the artists use walking as an aid to thinking, but many of them mention the importance of this as well. So there's something about the pace, the physical movement combined with breath, being out in the world. All of these things have been identified as aiding in thinking. For many artists, walking is an important means or way to work through ideas. It both frees and focuses the mind. All of the artists I interviewed also engaged in a wide variety of interdisciplinary and more conventional kinds of research, integrating this knowledge with the knowledge gained through their walking practices. Some of the most common forms of research that they engage in include historical, biographical, geographical, geological, climate, and environmental research. They all engaged in some kind of scientific and some kind of historical research to deepen their understanding of a specific site. Most of them engage in some kind of archival research as well. So they go to archives to find old maps, correspondence, letters, old photos, postcards, historical newspapers, and so on. They research in a lot of different kinds of ways, including talking to experts, attending talks and classes, reading books, articles, biographies, internet research, film and documentaries, doing interviews, and so on. Collaboration and community also came up as an important research component, as did interdisciplinarity. The artists uniformly described a process that included and often began with walking in a specific locale, a kind of gathering of raw material through the walk, engaging in lots of related research, reading lots of books, reflecting on the connections and meaning, and synthesizing all of this new knowledge into a work of art, which could be a video, installation, sculpture, a community event, or any number of things. If we think of research methodologies as different ways of mapping, we can understand that what we perceive, discover, the knowledge that we create is influenced by what we're looking for, what we're attuned to. The routes we choose and our way of moving through the terrain is influenced by so many things: disciplinary conventions, the speed at which we're moving, the questions and assumptions that animate our journey, and of course, things like our gender, race, able-bodiedness, socioeconomic status, and so on. The map will be very different if we're moving fast or slowly, if we're perceiving from street level or from a great height. Some map makers will focus on the trees and the birds, some on the people and their behavior, some on the streets and the structures, some on streams and sewers, some on established paved routes, some on forging new routes, some on following coyote or deer paths. Some will just stand in an alley and paint graffiti. The trajectory or the lines of inquiry of the different maps are conditioned and shaped by research methods. And all of these maps are necessary. It is by overlaying and combining all of the maps together that we come to have a more complete understanding of our world. If you're interested in this topic, please feel free to get in touch with me. My contact information is here. Thank you very much for your time and attention. Take good care. And here's my bibliography.